Thank you all for joining us today. I'm going to just briefly introduce our speakers and let them introduce themselves in more detail. Melissa Groo and Daniel Dietrich are Project Coyote ambassadors. Sarah Killingsworth is a Project Coyote wildlife educator. All these talented folks wear many hats and are phenomenal photographers. We're really excited to learn from today. So thanks to you all for taking some time to chat with us today. John, would you like to say a few words before we get started?
Yeah, John Davis, Executive Director of the Rewilding Institute and editor of our online publication, Rewilding Earth, which you can find at rewilding.org. We are honored and privileged to be doing these webinars with Project Coyote, a very close partner of ours. We work with Project Coyote on many issues. It's interesting and encouraging to see what a large turnout, more than 900 people registered today. And I think that's because we all love wildlife. And these inspiring photographers whose work you're about to see are, I think, exemplars of how we can all learn to coexist with wildlife. I think rewilding has shown us that we need to protect big, wild, interconnected places, but equally important, we need to coexist with all our wild neighbors. So I welcome this chance to learn from these outstanding photographers, and thank you, Michelle, for making us a part of this event.
Okay, I am going to go ahead and share my screen. So first, thank you so much to Project Coyote and the Rewilding Institute for hosting this webinar, and thank you to everyone who's taking time out of their Friday to attend it. Each of us are going to introduce ourselves briefly and then go through the program. There will be some time at the very end for questions, so if you do have questions, if you want to pop them in the chat, that would be great, and we'll try and get to as many as we can today, and the ones we don't get to will end up on the website later, so please feel free to put in any questions you have. I am Sarah Kellingsworth. I am a Project Coyote wildlife educator, a California naturalist, a conservation and wildlife photographer, and a member of the NAMPA Ethics Committee. And all of us at the end of the program, we have a slide with our contact information, our websites, et cetera, but mine are also listed here. So I want to introduce our topic today, and our goal in today's webinar is to give you an overview of ethical photography, specifically as it relates to photography for predators. And the question for today is, how do we approach predators both literally in the sense of a physical approach and conceptually in terms of the philosophy and the intention in that approach? And right up front, I want to acknowledge that all of us make mistakes, that none of us are perfect. And even when we approach a situation or an animal as mindfully as possible, it is still possible that things go differently than we expect. And we recognize that our human presence is in and of itself a disruption. And so what we think about is how we can minimize that disruption if we can't eliminate it altogether. I have personally found time and again, and I think Melissa and Daniel agree, that quite often I get better images by sitting back and being as quiet and non-threatening as possible. Depending on the situation, either by trying to be invisible, like in a blind, or sometimes from a distance, allowing an animal to see you so that you don't startle them as you approach. But sitting back and being as unobtrusive as possible leads to natural behavior unfolding, and that in itself leads to better images. So an ethical approach is not just better for wildlife, it actually leads to better photos. And with that, it's time to discuss what does ethical photography mean, and I will turn this over to Melissa and stop sharing.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for coming today and attending. And thank you so much to Project Coyote and to the Rewilding Institute for hosting. It's a real honor to be here. I am a wildlife and conservation photographer and writer, and I'm based near Ithaca, New York. And I'm really passionate about photographing birds and predators. And I'm really passionate about using my photography to try to dispel the notion that foxes, bobcats, coyotes, and others are nothing more than varmint. and to show that they have strong family bonds and emotions and have inherent value, and that they're important members of our ecological communities. And I want to go into a little bit about what is ethical photography. And at the most basic level, ethical photography is really photography practices that prioritize the subject's welfare and promote their comfort level. As wildlife photographers, when we're out there and we're in the heat of the moment, sometimes all we can think is, I got to get the shot. You know, I've been there. I get that way too. But we have to be aware that we may look like we're actually pursuing them, that we're pursuing them as a predator and that they're prey. And maybe we're keeping them from doing something important. Maybe we're crowding them. We have to always be aware of our own actions and how they might be impacting our subjects. The great news is that acting empathically and with intention will often grant you time, extended time with individual animals. And that extra time is often where the magic happens. All of my favorite photos have come about because I learned hard to understand and read behavior. I kept my distance, and I disguised or I minimized my presence. I firmly believe that ethics come from empathy. Put yourself in the place of the animal you're photographing. Imagine the fear of a mama fox or bobcat trying to protect her babies when she sees you, a potential predator, fixing all your interest and attention on her and her young. Keep in the forefront of your mind the well-being of the animal you're photographing and the impact that you're having. I feel like we have to be extra ethical when it comes to predators. They're so persecuted. They're so misunderstood. They face so many challenges. And of course, we are the ones who are the ultimate predators. We're the biggest threat to most of these predators, quite rightly. So it's really incumbent on us as photographers who care about our subjects and also really want to get the shot to reduce the likelihood of our being seen as a threat or deadly predator, and to avoid disrupting especially sensitive times in an animal's life. None of us are perfect, least of all me. Our very presence, as Sarah said, is a disruption. But if we can build a heightened awareness into our practice, you know, I really feel like it's just as important as knowing your camera settings. Is sort of going out with intention and consciousness and empathy. I really feel like we're going to be ahead of the game. And with that, I'm going to turn this back. I'm going to turn this over to Daniel. Yeah.
Hi, everybody. I'm Daniel Dietrich. Thanks to everybody for joining us. And I am a wildlife photographer and videographer out of Point Reyes in Northern California. I'm also a photography guide in Point Reyes National Seashore with a focus on photographing wild bobcats. I also started a nonprofit several years ago called Conservation Kids that I am connecting teenagers to conservation through the use of photography. So thank you all for joining. I appreciate you taking the time to do this with us. So why do we take wildlife photos? I as a guide, have a pretty broad perspective, taking out hundreds of people, and it's across the board. We want to just be in nature. We might be amateur photographers. It might be somebody's livelihood like it is mine. I take out conservation photographers that are doing stories on protecting wildlife. We do it for likes, we do it for followers. We might be doing it just for stock photography, or just going for the trophy shot. So there's this broad perspective of this broad range of reasons why we're all out there. And I think obviously with the topic of this conversation is we all have this responsibility to pursue this the way that we want to, in a way that is ethical, that is most conscious about the animals that we're shooting. And I got my start in wildlife photography when I first got going. The thing that drew me to wildlife photography was owls. I saw these magical pictures of great gray owls swooping in and grabbing a mouse off the top of the snow, or these snowy owls going down and grabbing wings outstretched, talons pointing at the camera in perfect light. And I just was mesmerized by these photos. And that was the start of sort of my full-time career. And I wanted to experience this. I wanted to see this. And so I spent quite a bit of time researching places where I could go and shoot these animals, and spent lots of money going to these places and trying to capture this image. And I found out after several trips that that really doesn't happen. It was really, really hard to find that scene, and even harder when you did see it. It was never in perfect light and mouse running across the snow. And so I should have done a little more research and just tried to see how those images were obtained. And quite often those images are obtained by baiting. So a wildlife photographer or a guide that's doing a workshop might go to a pet store and buy up 50 feeder mice, take them out into the field and dangle the mice in front of an owl, get the owl excited, and then throw the mouse out. And the photographer is ready with his camera, or the workshop participants are lined up ready to go, and 15 frames a second as the owl swoops in to grab the mouse. So, so you know, that was the start, and I was horribly disappointed to learn that technique, and that sort of became the start of my desire to really focus on conservation and doing this sport correctly. So you do just a quick great gray owl hunting search on Google, and this is what comes up right away. Outstretched wings. You can see the second one, this mouse on top of the snow, and the owl grabbing the mouse. These beautiful images, perfect light on the insides of the wings of this owl. So I'm not saying that every one of these pictures is a baited great gray owl. It's certainly possible to get some of these shots, but when you see a mouse running across the top of the snow, that's not how it happens in nature typically. These animals burrow under the snow, and the owls are listening for those opportunities to smash through the snow. Same with snowy owls. You do a Google search on snowy owl hunting, and this is what you see: hopping mice on the top of the snow, and these really wide angle shots with the prey on top of the snow. So again, not to say that all of these images are baited images, but it's up to us to do our research when we're going out into the field. If we're joining workshops, that we're making sure that we're asking the right questions before selecting workshops, and we're making conscious decisions that aren't putting these animals in harm's way by choosing to bait these owls for our own images. So manipulating any animal with any food or bait, just for the sake of our images, is certainly something that can put the animal in harm's way, and something that we should really consider avoiding. Some other examples: foxes and coyotes are often baited, and that's sometimes by hand, where we have food in our hand and we extend it out to these animals, or just leaving food out on the side of the road or just off the side of the road, and we sit back in our cars or sit back, you know, behind a tree, and we lure these guys in with food. And of course, that's very dangerous for these animals. We're luring them towards ourselves for possible conflict, or even closer to roads. We also have sugar and donut mixes that we leave out for bears. And then we have professional blinds in certain parts of the country and the world, where they're permanent blinds that are set up for maybe wolves, where food is left out. And this is a really popular technique in Finland as well, where bags of dog food are dumped in the vicinity of these beautiful lakes, and these professional hides are set up permanently, where we can take pictures of wolves and bears and other predators coming in, wolverines coming in to feed on this dog food, and we're taking these beautiful pictures with reflections off the water. So again, it's up to us to make these conscious decisions to not put the animal in harm's way, and to make sure that we're selecting guides and organizations that are practicing ethical techniques in essentiating these images. Two other popular techniques: lures and distress calls. So there's actually lures where they're mechanical devices that would swing a feather or a tail back and forth through a remote control, and quite often paired with a distress call, a dying rabbit. And this, of course, brings the curiosity out in coyotes and foxes to come in and to investigate what these noises and these movements are. A lot of these techniques are used for hunting, but it's certainly a technique that photographers use and some workshop leaders use. Certainly all of them are ethically questionable, and again, something that we should all be conscious about when we're deciding how to pursue these photos. So for me, with the owls, you know, I've spent many years doing this now, and it's not easy, but fantastic images are certainly possible of our owls and predators if we just really understand the animal's natural behavior, and we just practice some patience and persistence. After many years of trying for great gray owls, this was my first successful great gray owl shot hunting. And you can see there's no mouse or vole on top of the snow. He's dived out of a tree, and he's located it by sound, and he's crashing through the top of the crusted snow to get to the vole underneath. So just inches before his head actually hits the snow, his talons come out in front of him and penetrate the snow. These voles and mice don't run across the top of the snow like we see quite often. This is a short-eared owl. I was fortunate enough to see this pattern emerge over several days. This one area of this wetland where this owl was doing these big, huge circles, and I positioned myself alongside of a bush, and on one of his circles, I was able to get him looking right at me and catch that picture. A young great horned owl, several weeks every morning watching this one group of trees, and when these owls fledged, they were hunting the same field, and just put myself into position after recognizing their patterns, and he's flying into the tree here with a pretty large gopher. Short-eared owl with a vole in its tail in here, and this was a great example of just staying back and letting the natural sort of process unfold. The short-eared owl caught this vole and climbed, and this northern harrier sort of crept out of nowhere and flew up on it. You can see him lifting his leg up as the leg of the harrier swipes, trying to grab the actual vole. So this is a fairly distant shot, 600, but letting nature unfold it on its own, and giving us that opportunity to get these unique behaviors. Barn owl in flight, snowy owl in flight. So none of these shots are talons outstretched coming directly at the camera, but I'm certainly much more proud of these images for how they were obtained as opposed to what the final image itself represents. So I wanted to talk just briefly about drones as well. Drones have really revolutionized our ability to get to places, whether that's because of terrain or time. We have this great opportunity with drones, but with drone operations becomes this specific responsibility as well. And so I just wanted to share a couple of videos with you guys. Sometimes the stress we cause on animals is quite obvious with drones. I'm sure many of you have seen this video. It's with a mother bear and her cub trying to escape this drone. So hopefully this is coming through okay for you to see. You can see the drone sort of approaching, and the mother and the baby bear trying to get to the top of this steep hill. And then I'll just skip forward a little bit, and you can see what actually happens here. The mom makes it to the top, and the baby's right near the top of the hill when the drone comes in. And the drone coming in looks like a predator coming to grab the baby. And so the mom swats at the baby, and watch this fall the baby takes. It's really quite difficult to watch. It's absolutely fine. It's absolutely fine, but you'll see here how far it drops and how stressful this must be for the mother. So this baby eventually climbs to the top, and then gets up closer to the mother, and you can see once again the baby makes it all the way to the top. It takes a couple of minutes for it to make it, and then right when the baby's about to get to the top, the drone zooms in again. Luckily, the baby's up this time, and the baby and the mom get out of the way. So, just something to be conscious about with drone photography. And sometimes that's very obvious, obviously, but other times it's not so obvious. And this video of a bobcat. I mean, check out this shot, right? This shot is quite insane. And I spent an enormous amount of time with bobcats. So when I saw this shot for the first time, I was just mesmerized. Sitting on this tree like this, it's just an award-winning shot. But this is the actual video that was taken to obtain this shot. And I want to share this with you here. So it's 1 minute and 35 seconds, but I think it's important to see this whole video. Just stunningly beautiful animals, but you'll see their behavior change as the drone moves, as the drone gets closer and further. Having watched hundreds and hundreds of bobcats, bobcats are very curious and they're very cautious, and they don't want to take their eyes off of what potentially could be prey. And so all three of these bobcats are watching this this drone very intently, wondering what to do here. You can see the mom panting there. You can see her chest heave. You watch their ears go up and down and flatten out. Sarah will talk a little bit more about bobcat behavior, but you can see their ears flatten. And look at the mom going up into the tree. My guess here is that she's actually looking for an opportunity to swat this thing. If it came in close enough, perhaps she'd leap, or she'd try and knock it down out of the air. Hard to know exactly, but it's pretty obvious to see the sort of, for me, the stress that these animals are under. And here's where that really beautiful shot comes from. So it's, it's a little less obvious in that video, and I'm certainly trying not to be too critical of anybody's techniques, but it's certainly something to watch, to understand that not every situation is really easy to see the stress that we're putting these animals under, and for us to make those conscious decisions to be as least impactful on these animals as possible. One more thing I wanted to share with you before I turn it over to Melissa is mountain lion or cougar photography. So one of the hunting techniques that's used in cougar hunting is the use of dogs to tree these animals. And unfortunately, this is also a technique that some people use to photograph them. So the dogs have GPS collars, and they send the dogs out to locate the cougars and tree them. And then when the collars stop moving, the owners go out and they reach the location where the dogs are stationary. And a Google image of treeing cougars brings up this. So we've got some pretty stressed looking cougars up in the tree, many of them hissing. This one down here, you can see the two cougars in front of the dog. This one in the lower right here, we see two hounds actually pushing a cougar way out onto the edge of this cliff. So again, when we look at and celebrate a lot of these shots, we have to sort of put into context how these shots were taken and ask the right questions of the photographers and of the tour leaders and the workshop leaders to make sure that when we're selecting these places and people to help us with these images, that we're doing this with the animals' welfare in mind. And I think we hopefully this is educational for those that didn't know about it, and those that did, it's something that's reinforcing for all of you to hear. So with cougar photos, I'd like to turn it over to Melissa. Melissa is an expert in the topic of game farms, and I'd like her, I think you'll enjoy listening to her expand on this topic.
Thanks, Daniel. So, photography of elusive predators is super hard. To get a beautiful shot of one of these animals in the wild is certainly no small thing. And over the years, people have taken considerable steps, and the main one has been through using photography game farms. And I want to really first lay out what is a photography game farm, because there's a lot of confusion out there with just game farms in general, photography game farms. So a game farm is broadly defined is a captive facility that raises game animals for different purposes. And it might be for food, it might be for hunting, and it might be for photography / filmmaking. And sort of a specific definition that I've come up with is a captive facility that houses genetically wild animals in small cages, except when they're compelled by trainers to perform for paying photographers, filmmakers, and illustrators or painters. They specialize in elusive predators difficult to see in the wild: cougars, wolves, bears, tigers, snow leopards, lynxes, bobcats, foxes, even badgers and raccoons and skunks. And these places are not sanctuaries, they are not refuges, they are not preserves. They exploit animals strictly for profit. And I want to show you a couple of photos that reveal the truth of how these animals live, because the people that visit these places aren't allowed to see where they live. They live in small cages day after day. And if they don't perform well, they never come out of those cages. And these are animals like wolves that can typically roam maybe 30 miles in a day. This is an aerial shot taken by a friend, conservation photographer Chris Boyer, over one of the ones in Montana. There's 3 main photography game farms, 2 in Montana, 1 in Minnesota. And these animals live in these cages full time, except when they're trotted out to perform for treats for photographers. This is, I sort of did a major crop to sort of show you what a typical gray wolf exposure, there's probably Arctic wolves there too, looks like. And then they're brought out when they're trucked over distances to open areas for photography sessions, and they're let out of their cages. Sometimes they're trucked very long distances to different states for different sorts of settings, natural settings. And they're let out by their handlers. And I have it from very good authority from a whistleblower that they're often not fed very much before having to perform, so that makes them extra eager to perform for food. And the photographers line up outside of a fence and they get their incredible shots of these animals surging towards the camera. You know, it might be a snow leopard and it's running right at the camera. And often on social media, people aren't divulging that these are captive animals. They're making it sound like it was captured in the wild, that their lives were in danger, and they're lying about the truth of these animals' lives. And it's doing a disservice to the entire field of wildlife photography. But for me, more than anything, it's an animal welfare issue. And so I just want to give you a quick view of what these pictures typically look like. If we were to do a quick Google search, cougar jumping, go to images, and I would wager that every single one of the photos that comes up is one of these captive cougars that lives in a cage most of its life. That's from one of these 3 game farms that I've mentioned. And social media and stock agencies are replete with these images. And the other thing that I think a lot of people don't realize is that these places are the exotic version of puppy mills, because every spring and summer they breed these animals mercilessly so that they can offer these baby animal workshops, such that they have, let's see, baby or bobcat kittens log. This is sort of these are sort of the traditional type images that you'll see from game farms with bobcat kittens, where they are sort of perched perfectly, you know, on top of a log and amongst wildflowers or in a log. You know, I don't know for sure that every single one of these is a game farm shot as a disclaimer, but I would guess, you know, probably at least 90%. So these animals are posed for these baby animals, and then they have to be gotten rid of by whatever means necessary. If they're lucky, they end up in a roadside zoo. And if they're not lucky, they end up being sold to a fur store or a fur farm. I have lots of evidence that animals are going to these kinds of places from all of the game farms. So, you know, in conclusion, I just want to say, please don't support photography game farms, because they're basically as unethical as you can get. I think a lot of people go to these places. I have a lot of friends who have gone to these places who weren't aware of the truth, and they saw some things that disturbed them, or they learned the truth later. They regret having gone. It's an easy mistake to make, but we need to spread the word. And I would just ask, you know, that people consider, you know, think twice before you take a workshop or you attend one of these places, and think about what sort of industry you're supporting, and educate your photographer friends, and question images on social media, and, at least people can divulge that these animals are captive. That would be certainly a step in the right direction. But so yeah, that's sort of the short story of photography game farms. And now I'm gonna turn it over to Sarah.
Thanks, Melissa. Share my screen. So I realized I was so excited to get into the meat of our topic that I skipped over a teeny bit of my introduction, which is that I'm based in Northern California, and that, like Daniel and Melissa, passionate about photographing predators, and for me, passionate about photographing bobcats in particular. And we've just heard from Daniel and Melissa some of the problematic ways that people are getting images of elusive predators. I want to talk about the positive approach and ways that you can take images that you're proud of the way they were obtained. And Daniel hit the nail on the head, saying that it requires patience and persistence. There are many, many hours spent, but it's possible to do. So looking at photographing a predator, the first thing that you want to do is know the particular species behavior for what you want to photograph, and gather information about that animal's baseline behavior before you go out to shoot. You can research it by reading books or articles or watching videos or webinars. You can also spend time simply observing wildlife, whatever animal you're interested in photographing, by going out and watching it from a distance without shooting it at all, but just to observe the behavior and making notes about what you see. By doing the research, that allows you to anticipate the moments that will create memorable images, and that will ensure that you are able to obtain photos that you're proud of, that are memorable, and you're doing it in a way that you can always look at the behavior you saw before you were taking the images and compare it to what's happening when you're in the field shooting, and assess whether your presence or your actions are causing a change in that animal's behavior or their baseline. If you are interested in the concept of wildlife baseline behavior, there's an amazing book called What the Robin Knows. It's specifically about birds' baseline and behavior, but it actually talks about changes in bird behavior based on predators. And so actually using birds as a way to anticipate where predators are and how they're behaving. But it's a great book about empathy and understanding how you change the environment simply by entering an animal's vicinity. So knowing an animal's behavior lets you read that animal's body language, and you can assess whether it's relaxed or stressed. And by anticipating behavior, you get those images that you want. So I'm going to show a couple examples of bobcat photos. So this photo is of a relatively young bobcat, and this is a bobcat that's stressed. It's flattened down in the grass. You can see how its ears are sort of sideways, trying to hide. And if you see a bobcat doing this, you should back away, because it's going to stay like that, hiding, hoping that you disappear. If you approach it and it's truly terrified, it will sprint away, but it will flatten itself down and try and be invisible as long as you're too close and it's feeling threatened. But if you know that this is a sign of a stressed bobcat, you can, instead of sitting waiting to see what happens next, stand up or scooch backwards, depending on how high or low you are in the field. I'm usually down on the ground. And you can back off, give it space, and when it relaxes, it will resume its normal behavior. And again, the behavior is what you want to photograph. So if you give an animal room, you can get images of a bobcat hunting. And this one's got a juicy gopher for lunch. You can watch them grooming and napping, completely relaxed. I always say it's a gift of trust when wildlife grooms in your presence, because it's completely comfortable and relaxed. You also can get images of an animal in action. So if you know the behavior and know what your signs are when an animal's about to leap into action, you can anticipate that and adjust your settings accordingly. So this bobcats flatten their ears, and you might notice there's a difference between these flattened ears and the stressed bobcats flattened ears. These flattened ears are the sign of a cat that's about to pounce. So in a minute, this cat will leap and hunt the gopher that you saw a moment ago. So sort of like a house cat has behavior that you're used to seeing if you watch it around your house before it leaps or plays with a toy. A bobcat, similarly in the wild, has behavior that if you know what to look for, you know what will happen next. Daniel talked a lot about owls, and owls will also show signs of stress. They often will widen their eyes when they're stressed or make themselves narrower or taller. Sometimes young owls will fluff up their wings to try and appear bigger or clap their bills. Sometimes they will almost pant and fluff their neck feathers out. So again, you always, if you're photographing owls, you want to be watching their eyes, their chest, their wings, and see if their behavior shows signs of stress. In terms of other behavior to look for, if you're interested in photographing coyotes, so coyotes, when they hunt, typically will walk a field in a pattern, looking and listening for, in this case, gophers. And when they find something that they're interested in, they'll cock their head from side to side. And that's a sign that they might leap soon, but the last minute sign that they're about to leap is they actually crouch and lunge slightly backwards and then jump forwards. And so again, if you know that that's the behavior that happens before they leap, you can be ready with your settings and know to lift your camera aim up for them to leap up into the air. So these images that I've shown of the hunting predators are images that are captured again by giving them some space and some distance and knowing the behavior before you go out to shoot. In terms of trying to maintain invisibility, there are a couple different ways to try and minimize whether you shift the baseline for an animal. One way to do that is to shoot actually from your car. It's actually one of my favorite ways to shoot, because for animals that live near roads, cars are part of their baseline. So this is an American badger, obviously close enough to the road that you can see the car parked behind it. And the cars, because they're part of their everyday, don't cause a disturbance. So if you're sitting in the car and able to shoot out the window, you're near the animal, but you're not stressing it because the cars are going by. And in fact, usually parked cars aren't seen as a threat either. But some wildlife is more skittish, and kestrels, bobcats, and sometimes even coyotes, if you zoom right up and park too abruptly, will flush and run. So you have to do it very carefully and slowly. But shooting out an open car window like this, so this is a beanbag that goes over the car door. There's different models of these. I like this one. But it allows you to balance your camera on the door and shoot from your car in a way that is far less disruptive to the wildlife than actually getting out of your car and approaching it at all. Sometimes it's best generally actually to sit and watch from your car just as much as if you're out in the field, and not shoot immediately, but wait and let the animal settle back down if it's turned, and notice that your car has stopped, and let it go back to what it was doing, and then let it relax and shoot. So shooting from cars is one way to minimize the disturbance you cause as a photographer, but another way to not disrupt the baseline is to shoot from a blind. And Melissa has a lot of experience in shooting from blinds. So I'm going to stop sharing and turn it back over to her.
Thank you, Sarah. That was terrific. That book that you mentioned, What the Robin Knows by John Young, is one of my favorites too. It's just so fascinating and useful. So yeah, so I'm going to talk about blinds, pop-up blinds, and I'm a big fan. They provide a wonderful way to immerse ourselves in the wild or in suburbia or what have you. It doesn't really matter what you're photographing. If you can actually sort of hide your outline and your movements, animals are going to be more comfortable with you. And it's not that they don't necessarily know that you're in there, because as many of you know, animal senses are so much sharper than ours, and they often will know that you're in there. But they'll definitely be a lot more comfortable with you. This is just a basic Ameristep hunting blind that was my first blind, and I used it at my mother-in-law's down in Florida at a little pond, a little lake behind her house to photograph wading birds, and I kind of got hooked on blinds then. But I really had an incredible experience a couple of years later when I found out about a fox den on someone's property in a suburb. They were denning under a shed, and there were these 6 kits, and I set up a blind nearby after sort of assessing whether it would disturb the parents or not. I did a lot of watching from a far distance after I put up the blind. And that's a really important thing, as Sarah says, to sort of gather baseline behavior. What are the foxes doing when they're behaving naturally? And then as you inhabit the blind or bring the blind a little closer, are they changing their patterns of behavior? And, you know, sitting in that blind for long hours at a time, I was really able to capture wonderful natural behavior over a series of weeks of the kits playing. And this is actually the father. He was very devoted, as most canid fathers are. And then I sort of graduated up to sort of the top of the line photography blinds, which are made by Tragopan. And full disclosure, I'm an ambassador for Tragopan blinds, but they make these really well-made, durable blinds that have all kinds of bells and whistles for photographers and are way exceed the capabilities of your standard hunting blind. And I'll put them up in all kinds of conditions. I'm able to shoot really low. You can see my lens sticking out of that lower panel. And this is actually a prone blind that I use sometimes. I need to spend more time in it, hopefully this spring, but you can lie down there. That's Denver Holt, who's an owl researcher some of you may know of, and I was on assignment in Alaska for Smithsonian Magazine, photographing snowy owls at the nest. And they're super sensitive at the nest and super skittish. And it was the only way that I could photograph them was to be in a blind. And that was a real privilege to be able to capture intimate moments in their lives. But so nesting time and denning time is really the most sensitive time in the life cycle of any animal. And it's super important that we are as conscientious and careful as we can be. Raptors are very sensitive to photograph. So they're great subjects for working from blinds with. I think one of the main things we really want to keep in mind is not freaking out the fox or the coyote or the bobcat or what have you in such a way that they would possibly move their den, because these animals will readily move dens to a place that they, you know, if they feel crowded, if they feel harassed, if they feel threatened. And I would never want to be the cause of animals, especially if it was like a coyote or foxes moving those dens, because they might have to choose a place that's not quite private. And when you put a blind up, often what I'll do is I suggest putting it up before you even inhabit it, so that they can become accustomed to it as a part of the landscape and see it as sort of this non-threatening, integral part of the landscape. And so I might even put it up weeks before I get in it, and I'll put it up at quite a good distance, maybe at least 30, 40 yards away, and then I might move it incrementally closer. And I think, you know, more than anything, I think the thing to be aware of is you're inhabiting the blind, is your being in there, is it somehow inhibiting or changing the behavior of the parents? You know, the kids, the young, they're not really going to care about you. They don't know enough yet to be scared. But the parents, that's who you have to be really clued into their behavior, because you would never want to interfere with them feeling free to come and to go, to check in on the young, or to bring, most especially to bring food to the young. And so You know, if you've been in your blind for a number of hours, or even if you've been standing near a den or an owl nest and you haven't seen the parents come back with food and it's been quite a while, that's a good sign that it might be time to leave. Because a lot of parents won't return to the nest or the den because they're either afraid of the people there or they don't want to give away the location of the nest or den and of the young. And so that's something to always be particularly attuned to. And in closing, I just want to say that in terms of posting locations on social media or other places, letting other people know about the locations of the nests or dens, I think can be quite problematic in this day and age. You know, nature photography has really exploded in popularity, and with instant messaging and online databases and social media, GPS points, all that stuff, we are putting more and more pressure on these animals at the most sensitive time of their lives. And so we have to be very, very careful with who we share that information with, because once the word's out, you know, there can be a lot of pressure on these very, very special situations. So yeah, I think that's basically it. And I'm going to turn it back over to, is it Sarah?
Yep.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yep, thank you. Okay. So obviously we had a lot to cover, and we've really just sort of skimmed the surface of both some of the problematic things, practices that happen that many people, myself included, frankly, when I first got into wildlife photography, which I got into through a love of wildlife and behavior, I had no idea people baited owls or that game farms existed. And so hopefully this presentation is illuminating those practices for people that didn't know that they were happening, and also giving some ideas for a positive approach to predators. We did just want to talk quickly about conservation photography. So Daniel, Melissa, and I are all passionate about using our images to promote change in the world, and particularly to protect wildlife. And so I just wanted to mention that if you are a photographer and capturing images of predators or wildlife, that we would encourage you to consider ways that you can use those images to enhance the lives of the wildlife that you love and protect them. So there's lots of ways to do that, including teaming up with local nonprofits. And your images can be used in campaigns or educational materials. So this is one of my photos, was recently used for the Project Coyote campaign in New Mexico for Roxy's Law, which I understand passed the New Mexico legislature last night by one vote and is now on the governor's desk. So fingers crossed. This was a trapping law, anti-trapping law in public lands. So you can use your photographs also in educational materials, in articles and photo essays. You can even use them locally, whether in blog posts or next door, but ways to educate people about coexistence and protecting wildlife. It's really hard to overstate how captivating an image can be, and how much impact you can have from just a few important images and educating people with them. If you're interested, I'm going to show a slide. Our last slide is, again, just some information, our websites, our Instagrams, things like that. And I can leave this up, and John and Michelle, I think at this point we are ready to field some of the questions that might have come in. I'm sure there are at least a couple.
Okay, you start, Michelle.
There are lots
Michelle.
of questions. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
So we were getting a ton of questions about more details on the game farms and identifying pictures that come from game farms. So can y'all elaborate a little bit more on how to keep an eye out for that?
Go for it, Melissa.
You know, it's a really sort of thorny issue because I don't like to cast doubts on the work of the photographers who are out there doing the hard work and getting spectacular shots because they're putting in the time, they have the patience, they have the understanding. But I will say that, you know, if you see an animal and it just looks perfectly glossy and it's going right at the camera and it's a very clean setting and you know, it's an elusive predator that is sort of very hard to see in the open. And then the person who's posting the picture doesn't really talk much about how it was derived. They might just say Siberian tiger, period. It's, you know, that's a time when you begin to question, did this really take place in the wild? And feel free to ask people, you know, say, where was this taken? Is this a wild animal? Is this a captive animal? To try to get at the truth. And sometimes you can really tell if you sort of look at the full body of somebody's work, whether it's on their IG feed, go look at their other pictures, or whether it's on their website. And do they have picture after picture after picture of different species that are hard to see in the wild, yet are just like sort of very artfully arranged, very perfectly in view, you know, and just looking like just totally comfortable with the experience. So again, I get nervous about doing this because there are people out there now who are spending the time and who are using things like camera traps that aren't intrusive at all, who are able to get these spectacular photos. And so you have to do a little bit of digging. You have to really sort of look at someone's body of work, because in the end, your work is really down to your ethics and your integrity. And if you don't have that, you're kind of done for. And so I would just really suggest that people make decisions that really truly honor the animal and are honest in their captioning. You know, truth in captioning is super important. And if you photographed a captive animal, go ahead and talk about it. You know, there's certainly plenty of captive facilities that exist for a good reason. There are plenty of true sanctuaries that need to exist and that really do take good care of their animals. There are AZA accredited facilities that take reasonably good care of their animals. You know, whether or not you agree with zoos, they're certainly held to higher standards than roadside zoos. Anyway, I'm sorry if that's long-winded. Do either of you want to add anything, Daniel or Sarah, to that?
One more thing that you can consider. I'm sorry. Yeah, one more thing that you can consider is the angle of the shot. So if somebody's shooting at 55 millimeters and you have this wonderful sort of wide angle shot of a wolf growling at you, you know, typically in the wild, you're not going to be 17 feet away from a wolf to get a wide angle shot at 55 millimeters, right? These shots should be at 600 millimeters with teleconverters. So take a look at the image and see from an angle standpoint, is it a short angle? Is it a short lens or a long lens? And that can help you determine as well.
Yeah. I just would add one quick thing to that, which is for people who are supporting photographers or using photographs in their work. I do think that a lot of photographers, like the three of us, who are consciously ethical about the way we do it, there's information in the captions, or a lot of people in your Instagram, you know, in the profile or otherwise with the images they're taking and posting, will say all animals wild, never baited, not called in. And so
Right.
people can see that you can, if somebody doesn't say how they got a shot and you have a suspicion that it might have been obtained in a way that you wouldn't be comfortable with, then you can ask how they did. But there are also a number of photographers who affirmatively state that those are not practices that we engage in. And so that's another way to avoid questionable images.
Right.
Another tricky ethical question coming from two or three of you. If you're out in the field and you see a photographer using unethical practices, should you confront them? Should you report them somewhere? Is there anything you should do?
Daniel, why don't you start off with this, because you have such a lovely, gentle touch, much more so than I probably would have.
I'd probably run the gamut of all different approaches, but yeah, that is a really, really tough question, John, because especially nowadays, people have short fuses, and so we've got to be careful. And certainly if somebody's doing something illegal, that's certainly cause for documentation. And if somebody's doing something that is very, very harmful or puts the life of the animal at risk, yeah, that's certainly an opportunity to document it and to share that with authorities. The other side is I do talk with photographers when I do see people doing things that are very stressful to the animal. I don't do it with any authority or pretend that I am somebody bigger or greater than them. It's more of an experience thing that I can share, that I'm a guide, and here's some of the things that I see and that help us capture better images of animals from a behavior standpoint. From my experience, doing this has worked really well for me. So yeah, it is a really tough question, John. And I think we've probably all had an experience where we're shooting and then someone charges past us and scares the animal away. So yeah, it is a tough thing, but I think nobody's responding very well to being told they're doing something wrong or being told what to do. So I'm trying to think of the most polite and cautious way to approach people is probably the way that has worked best for me.
Michelle?
Excellent, thanks. There's lots of questions about what can be done to promote ethical photography, what can be done to end these game farms. Does anyone have any recommendations, places to look, where to direct folks on next steps and public outreach and awareness?
Yeah, I would just say, again, just really sort of do a little bit of research, find out who the people are that you feel are really sort of have the same values as you and are going about things in a very ethical and careful way. As we've all said, we all make mistakes. I make mistakes. None of us are perfect, but try to support photographers who really seem to express empathy and care and reflect on their experiences in the field. In terms of doing away with game farms, I do think that they will, like circuses, because these places are basically circuses for photographers. And some people even refer to them as wildlife brothels. And I do think that they will go away someday, but we need to not support them. We need to not support the photos that come out of them. We need to not support the photographers that teach workshops at them, because there are some pros that continue to teach at them, even knowing what they know. Because all these places have racked up violations from the animal welfare violations and have gotten citations. And so, yeah, keep apprised with all of us. There may be some calls to action over the next year. There's some things in the works, and we will let people know if we need to sort of mobilize voices and of people who want to see this practice come to an end. So just keep an eye out, and I'm excited that there's going to be some things coming down the pike.
The other thing to just really stress is if you're going on any workshop or you're going on any tour, just do your research on the tour leader and ask the questions. Yeah. If you're going on an owl workshop, ask them if they use bait, and if they use bait, then make the choice not to go on a baited owl workshop. Some of us are tempted to go and shoot at game farms. Just don't do it. It's every image we buy, every animal we photograph at those places makes those businesses viable longer. So those are some choices that you can make.
And people need to understand that game farm photos are not allowed in any prestigious photo contest. NANPA, the North American Nature Photography Association, came out with a statement against game farms last year, and they're not accepted in many publications. And so and stock photography has kind of been dying this long, slow death. So it's really not worth the investment to even go to a game farm. I think a lot of photographers used to go there because they wanted to build up their stock photography catalog, and the market is really dying as more and more people become savvy about the truth of these places and what a horrendous fate that these animals face.
A related and specific ethical question from Elisa Royer. What role do magazines play in enforcing ethical practices on the part of photographers who publish photos on their pages?
Daniel or Sarah?
Yeah, it's another really tough question, John. I think they do have a responsibility. I think as we become more savvy and we become more conscious about wildlife and we become more compassionate to their fate, that the magazines have an authority. They have a responsibility to protect the very animals that we are photographing and discussing. So there is an opportunity for all of them to improve. I think they can make a more asserted effort to use images from ethical photographies from places that are protecting animals instead of exploiting them. And I think more and more of them are. I know personally that several of them have asked some of the stock agencies that they want wild images over game farm images. So I think we're making progress, and I think we need them to join us in the fight.
I mean, part of the problem is that so many editorial staff is so hard pressed for time, and it's such an easy thing to reach, to go to one of the stock agencies, plug in mountain lion leaping and just get that first photo. And these places are just awash in these photos. And so it means doing your due diligence. It means taking an extra step, taking the time to make sure something is sort of ethically sourced. And it's a luxury that, it's hard for some editors to indulge in. So, I wish that there was like a stock agency that just had like expressly, camera trap photos and photos from conservation photographers and wildlife photographers who are really thoughtful in the field. They don't even necessarily have to be pros, but like they've done time in the field, they've been patient, they've observed behavior, they work from a distance. And that's just sort of a dream that we have, is that, someday there's going to be an agency like that where you're not going to have, and I do think that there's a place for captive photography. I think a lot of people who aren't able to travel and who like to photograph captive animals because it's easy. I don't want to damn all captive photography. It's just a matter of sort of doing your research and making sure that the facility that you're supporting and that you're visiting for photography is not there to exploit animals. There's the Global Federation of Sanctuaries that sort of accredits all sanctuaries that it finds meet certain standards. And as I said, there's AZA accredited zoos. So yeah, we just have to do research. That's all. We have so much information available now through the web that there's really no excuse for, I think, for making choices that that are really shortcuts for the animals that we love.
That's excellent. Oh,
I forget who's next. Go, Michelle.
well, we're coming up past the hour, so I know people might have to jump off, but if there's time, a really great question that somebody posed was, what is the most meaningful image you've taken in your career? Maybe we have enough time to hear from each one of you on what comes to mind with that question.
Sarah?
Oh, thanks, Melissa. Well, I'm sitting here, part of the word meaningful, because I guess I'm wondering, meaningful could mean impactful in terms of an image that I've taken that I think might be important or make a difference, versus personally meaningful. Because that has probably a little bit more to do with what's personally gratifying. So I'll start with personally meaningful. I think a photo I took of a bobcat mother nursing her 3 kittens is probably the most personally meaningful photo I've taken. A tremendous gift to observe that behavior, and just a really sweet, sweet moment. In terms of meaningful from an impact standpoint, I'm not sure. I took a photograph a couple of years ago at a beach out here of a sea lion that had been shot, and that photo went viral. So brought home to me the importance of conservation photography and the impact of images. But that's probably the most impactful image I've taken from a public standpoint. What about you guys?
Daniel, you next.
Oh gosh, it's a really, really difficult question. Having taken hundreds and hundreds of thousands of photos, it's pretty hard to pick one specific image. But I think in general, it's the images that have moved the needle on conservation. So whether it's a photo of a coyote that helps stop killing contests, or the video of a bobcat that helps end bobcat trapping in California and bobcat hunting. I've taken some images of the tule elk. I'm very involved in the tule elk here in Point Reyes Station. The tule elk are, there's a proposal to cull some of the tule elk in Point Reyes National Seashore, and I'm very involved in this, and having some images of them tangled up in baling twine and having barbed wire wrapped around their antlers, showing the fate of the challenges that they have out here in Point Reyes. It's a powerful image. The great gray owl shot of it smashing into the snow, while not technically perfect, represents that shot is possible for all the people that are interested in capturing owls without using bait. So yeah, it's really hard to pick a single image, but I think the general theme with the 3 or 4 that come to mind are the ones that have moved the needle in protecting these animals. Those are the ones that I've felt most emotional about.
Okay, and
Yeah, you guys have seen my my favorite photo at the beginning of this talk. It's those bobcats. I just, I've been privileged to go to some pretty extraordinary places, but I have to say it's because that picture was taken just a few miles from my house. When I've traveled across the country to photograph bobcats, whether it's with Daniel or in Yellowstone, I've actually photographed bobcats in like 6 different states because I'm kind of obsessed. But this was an experience where I was contacted by a tracker friend of mine, just a naturalist guy, who let me know one morning that there were a family of bobcats, a mama and her kits, coming to feed off of a deer that was roadkill, that had been killed by a car. And I was able to photograph from my car, and I photographed them feeding on the carcass, and also just kind of pulling back and resting together and nuzzling each other. And it just means so much to me, because I'm able to use it to try to change people's minds about these animals, that they're not varmint, and they have feelings and they have family relationships. And so it's extra special because it was close to home, and because it shows a very elusive animal having sort of a family relationship. And so yeah, that's pretty much my favorite.
Excellent.
So
Well,
are we at the end?
yeah, I think that might be a good positive note to end on.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Everybody, appreciate it.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Great talk, great
Yeah.
photos. Great photos,
Thank you, everybody. Great experience. Bye.
everyone.